I always thought my roommate was strange and careless. Turns out he was getting revenge for something I did 10 years ago. I was chilling on the couch when my college roommate asked, "Hey man, do you need me to throw out the trash?" That's when I knew finding a roommate on Craigslist wasn't such a bad idea after all. Until the very next day, when I found my laptop in the kitchen sink, soaking in dirty dishwater. "Oh man," Josh said when I confronted him, not even looking up from his game. "Must have knocked it in while washing dishes." "My bad." "Dude, that's a $2,000 laptop," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You need to replace this." He finally paused his game, looked at me with dead eyes. "Prove it was me." "You just admitted it." "Did I? Maybe you left it there." He unpaused his game. "Stop being so careless." The smell started a week later, this sweet rotting stench that only existed in my room. I tore the place apart looking for the source while Josh watched from my doorway. "Maybe you should clean more," he suggested, even though I could see his room behind him, pristine as always. 2 days later, I woke up coughing from the smell of a rotting corpse and practically tore my room apart. After 2 hours, something told me to check the outlet covers, and when I unscrewed them, my heart dropped. Inside were chunks of rotting mice tumbled onto my carpet, carefully stuffed behind each plate with their tails wrapped around the wires. I called the resident assistant immediately, and I could practically hear her rolling her eyes over the phone. "Josh already told me you've been having episodes. He even sent photos of you taking apart your room at 3 a.m. I hadn't been awake at 3 a.m. When I tried showing her the mice, she just sighed. "You can file an official complaint with management if you want, but processing time is 2 to 3 months. There's no other dorms available." I didn't know if I could survive 2 weeks. That night I vomited blood after dinner. Just a little, but enough to terrify me. I tried to tell my best friend Francisco, but he wasn't answering my calls. The last text he sent me was telling me about how he'd run into Josh at Starbucks. When I finally cornered him at college the next day, he couldn't look me in the eye. "Josh told me about your anger issues, man. I think you need help." "What anger issues, and what did he tell you?" Francisco backed away. "He showed me the texts, okay? The threats you sent him. I don't want drama." I'd never sent Josh as much as an angry emoji. When I confronted Josh that night, he was making dinner, humming. "Why did you lie to Francisco?" "I don't know what you're talking about." He didn't even turn around. "Maybe you should check your sent messages. Sometimes people forget what they write when they're upset." The gaslighting was so smooth, I actually checked my phone. Then came the morning I couldn't get out of bed. I'd been losing weight for weeks, but that day I found out I'd lost 15 pounds. You see, food had become Russian roulette. I was fine when I ate out, but violently ill every time I touched anything from our kitchen. "I'm calling the cops," I told him after my hair started falling out. "This is poisoning. This is attempted murder." Josh sat at the kitchen table, concerned face perfectly arranged. "Please do. I'll show them how I've been documenting your deterioration. The paranoid accusations, the weight loss, destroying your own belongings. I've been trying to get you help." He pulled out his phone, showed me photos. Pictures of me looking skeletal, timestamps showing my erratic behavior, concerned messages to my family. "I even reached out to your mom. She's worried too." I moved to the couch, then my car when the smell got unbearable. The confrontations became screaming matches where he stayed eerily calm, documenting my breakdowns while I begged him to stop whatever he was doing. "You're sick," he'd say, stroking my hand like he cared, "but not from anything I'm doing. You need help." By the time I stumbled back into the apartment that final night, I'd lost 35 pounds and looked like death walking. Josh was on voice chat, headset glowing green in the dark. "Yeah, teaching someone a lesson," he laughed to whoever was listening. "Some people never learn." My legs gave out right there in his doorway. He spun around in his chair, pulled off his headset, and smiled. "Ready to know why?" he asked. "I know why," I gasped. "You're demented." He chuckled and pulled something up on his monitor. The screenshot was ancient, 8 years old according to the timestamp. And then it all came flooding back. When I was about 15, there was a guy who lost it after I killed him in Rust with a knife during a loot run. And he screamed into his mic, threatened me, and swore he would find me somehow and make my life hell and take away everything I loved. And we had laughed about it for days afterward, joking about how crazy people got over games. "I was 13, Josh said quietly. "My parents were getting divorced. That stupid game was the only place that felt safe, until you found it." What I did next made up for everything Josh had ever done to me. I stumbled down the apartment stairs and made it to my car in the parking lot, hands shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the door. My whole body felt like it was buzzing with this weird mix of rage and fear, and something else I couldn't name. Josh's face kept flashing in my mind, that smile when he showed me the screenshot. The way he said his parents were getting divorced like that made poisoning me okay. I wanted to go back up there and do something I'd regret, something that would prove every lie he'd told about my anger issues. But I forced myself to breathe and think instead of just reacting. If I lost control now, if I went back in there and did what my body was screaming at me to do, I'd be playing right into his hands. He had documentation, photos, witnesses who believed his version. I had nothing but the truth, and that wasn't enough yet. I needed to be smarter than him, colder than him, more patient than him. So I sat there in the driver's seat with my hands gripping the steering wheel until they stopped shaking, and I made myself think about next steps instead of revenge. The voice chat confession kept playing in my head on repeat. Yeah, teaching someone a lesson, he'd laugh to whoever was listening. Some people never learn. That was my proof, my smoking gun, if I could figure out how to use it. I pulled out my phone and found this YouTube video about breathing exercises for panic attacks. It felt stupid at first, breathing in for 4 counts and out for 6, but after about 20 minutes, my heart rate finally slowed down enough that I could think clearly. The adrenaline was still there, but it wasn't controlling me anymore. I had a plan forming, or at least the start of one. Document everything. Build a case. Get help from people who would actually believe me. Stop trying to convince Josh to admit what he'd done and start proving it to everyone else. I checked the time on my phone, just past midnight, and realized I needed supplies before I could do anything else. The 24-hour pharmacy was 15 minutes away and practically empty when I got there. I grabbed a shopping basket and went straight for the office supplies section. Composition notebook, the kind with the sewn binding that you can't tear pages out of without it being obvious. A box of gallon-size evidence bags, the kind with the zip seals and the white write-on strips. A small fireproof safe with a combination lock. And a cheap voice recorder, the kind lawyers use for dictation. My hands were steady now that I had concrete tasks to focus on. The cashier looked half asleep and didn't even glance at what I was buying, just scanned everything and took my card. I drove back to the campus parking lot and found a spot under a bright streetlight where I could see anyone approaching. Then I opened the notebook and started writing. Everything that had happened, starting from when I found my laptop in the sink. The dates were fuzzy at first, but I checked my text messages and photos to nail down the timeline. The laptop on September 15th, the smell starting around September 22nd, finding the mice on September 24th, the first time I threw up blood on September 25th, Francisco avoiding me starting September 27th. Every detail I could remember about Josh's gaslighting, his fake concern, his perfect documentation. I wrote down what he'd said tonight word for word about being 13 and his parents divorcing and that stupid game being his safe place. I wrote down the voice chat confession, the exact words I'd heard. Teaching someone a lesson. Some people never learn. I filled 12 pages with tiny handwriting, my hand cramping by the end, but I got it all down with timestamps and as much detail as I could pull from my exhausted brain. At 3 a.m., I finally worked up the courage to go back inside the apartment. I needed clothes, my laptop charger, my textbooks, anything I couldn't afford to lose. I parked in the lot and sat there for 10 minutes making sure Josh's car was there and his bedroom light was off. Then I grabbed both of my duffel bags from the trunk and crept up the stairs as quietly as possible. The apartment door wasn't locked because Josh never locked it, said it was unnecessary in a dorm building. I slipped inside and stood in the dark hallway listening for any sound from his room. Nothing. Just the hum of the refrigerator and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. His door was closed with no light showing underneath. I moved to my room and started packing as fast as I could while still being quiet. Laptop and charger into one bag. Clean clothes, my good shoes, my winter coat into the other. Toothbrush and deodorant from the bathroom, my textbooks and notebooks from my desk. The framed photo of my parents I kept by my bed. I left most of my stuff because I didn't have room and didn't want to make multiple trips. The whole time I kept expecting Josh's door to open, kept expecting to hear his voice asking what I was doing. But he never woke up, or if he did, he stayed in his room. I was out of there in less than 15 minutes with 2 bags packed and my heart still racing. I drove to the parking lot by the campus library because it was well lit and had security cameras everywhere. The library was closed, but the lot stayed open all night for people studying late. I reclined my driver's seat as far as it would go and pulled my coat over me like a blanket. It was cold and uncomfortable, and I couldn't stretch out my legs, but at least I felt safe. At least Josh didn't have a key to my car. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but every time I started to drift off, I'd jerk awake from nightmares. Rotting mice tumbling out of the outlet covers, Josh standing over me with that dead-eyed stare, the smell of decay that had filled my room for weeks. I'd wake up gasping and have to remind myself I was in my car, I was safe, he couldn't get to me here. It happened probably 6 or 7 times before I finally fell into a deeper sleep around 5 a.m. When my alarm went off at 8 a.m., I felt like I'd been hit by a truck, every muscle sore from sleeping curled up in the driver's seat. Monday morning, I drove straight to Campus Health without even stopping to shower or change clothes. I knew I looked rough, probably smelled rough too, but that was actually good. I wanted them to see exactly how bad things had gotten. The intake nurse at the front desk took one look at me, and her eyes went wide. She didn't make me fill out forms or wait in the lobby like usual. She just said, "Let me get a doctor," and disappeared into the back. 2 minutes later, I was in an exam room with a doctor introducing herself. Dr. Ananya Barrera, her name tag said. She was maybe 40 with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a bun. She sat down on the rolling stool and said, "Tell me what's going on," and then she just listened. I told her everything. starting from the beginning, and she didn't interrupt once. She just took notes and nodded in the right places and looked genuinely concerned. When I got to the part about vomiting blood and losing 35 pounds, she stopped writing and looked at me hard. "We need to run some tests right away," she said. "Blood work, urinalysis, the full panel, and if you can safely get samples of any food or drinks from your apartment, we need to test those too." I almost cried right there from the relief of being taken seriously. Dr. Barrera did a physical exam and wrote down everything she found. My weight, which was down to 142 from my normal 177. Signs of dehydration in my skin and eyes. My hair that was falling out in clumps when she ran her fingers through it. The tremor in my hands that I couldn't control anymore. She measured everything and photographed the worst parts with my permission. Then she sat down and explained that this medical record would be crucial if I decided to pursue legal action. It was documentation from a neutral third party showing the physical harm I'd experienced. She printed out orders for the lab work and handed me a list of symptoms to track going forward. Nausea, vomiting, dizziness, anything unusual. And she gave me her direct extension and said to call immediately if things got worse. "You're not crazy," she said as I was leaving. "And you're not overreacting. What you're describing is serious and it needs to be addressed." Those words meant more to me than she probably knew. It was the first real validation I'd gotten from anyone in authority that I wasn't making this up. I sat in my car in the campus health parking lot and called poison control. The number was on a sticker on my phone case, one of those things you never think you'll actually need. A woman answered and I explained the situation as clearly as I could. Suspected poisoning over several weeks, multiple symptoms, living with someone who had motive. She listened carefully and then walked me through proper evidence collection procedures. Chain of custody was critical, she explained. I needed to photograph everything with timestamps before touching it. Use clean gloves when handling potential evidence. Store everything in sealed containers with labels showing date, time, and location. Document who had access to the items and when. And most importantly, avoid the apartment kitchen entirely from now on. Don't eat anything that could have been tampered with. She emphasized that last part multiple times. Your safety is the priority, she said. Evidence is important, but not worth risking your health further. I thanked her and hung up, then sat there for a few minutes just breathing. I had a plan now. I had people who believed me. I had documentation starting to build. Josh might have spent weeks setting up his revenge, but I was going to take him down with patience and paperwork. The campus police substation is in the basement of the student center, and I find it after asking directions twice because the signs are terrible. Officer Hopkins is at the front desk, a guy maybe in his 30s with tired eyes who looks like he's heard every excuse in the book. I lay out my documentation notebook and start from the beginning with the laptop in the sink, then the mice in the outlets, then the food contamination and weight loss. He's nodding but not really engaged until I pull out my phone and show him the photos of the rotting mice on my carpet, with their tails wrapped around the wires. His whole posture changes and he leans forward, asking if I still have the physical evidence. I explain housing made me throw it out, but I documented everything with photos and timestamps. Hopkins takes my phone and scrolls through the pictures slowly, zooming in on the mice, then looks at my medical records from campus health showing the weight loss and blood work. He asks about my roommate's behavior, and I tell him about Josh's calm reactions, the gaslighting, the fake concerned roommate act. Hopkins starts taking notes and asks if I have any proof Josh was the one who put the mice there. I admit I don't have direct proof, but explain the timeline and how Josh was the only other person with access to my room. Hopkins nods and says circumstantial evidence can still build a case, especially combined with everything else. He explains this could involve criminal charges for harassment, property destruction, animal cruelty, and potentially poisoning if the lab results support it. The animal cruelty charge is the strongest because I have clear evidence of dead animals being used to torment me, and that's a misdemeanor in this state. The poisoning is harder to prove because I'd need to show Josh deliberately contaminated my food with intent to harm, not just that I got sick. Hopkins makes copies of everything I brought, including my documentation notebook, medical records, and all the photos. He opens an official case file and gives me a report number I can reference, writing it on a business card along with his direct extension. He tells me to document any further contact with Josh, save all text messages, and call immediately if I feel unsafe. The whole process takes almost 2 hours, and by the end I feel drained but also validated that someone in authority is finally taking this seriously. I spend the rest of Monday on my laptop in a coffee shop, pulling up Amazon and searching for security equipment. Motion-activated cameras disguised as phone chargers cost $60 each, and I buy 2, plus tamper-evident seals for food containers and a mini fridge with a combination lock. The total comes to almost $300, which hurts my budget badly, but I can't put a price on safety anymore. I select same-day delivery and pay extra to have everything arrive by 8 p.m. While I wait, I grab food from a place I trust and force myself to eat even though my stomach is still messed up from weeks of contamination. The cameras arrive right on schedule, and I sit in my car reading the instructions, figuring out how to set them up and link them to my phone. They're pretty simple. Just plug them in and download the app, then they start recording whenever they detect motion. I wait in the parking lot until past midnight, watching Josh's window until his light finally goes out around 1 a.m. His gaming schedule is predictable, always staying up late then crashing hard, which gives me my window. At 2 a.m., I use my key as quietly as possible and slip into the dark apartment. My heart is hammering, so hard I can hear it in my ears as I creep toward the kitchen in the darkness. I plug the first camera into an outlet behind the microwave, where it looks like a normal phone charger, angling it to capture the whole kitchen and fridge area. Then I move to my bedroom door and set up the second camera in the hallway outlet, positioning it to show anyone entering or leaving my room. I work entirely by the light of my phone flashlight, keeping it dim and checking Josh's closed door every 30 seconds. The whole setup takes maybe 15 minutes, but it feels like hours, and I'm sweating through my shirt by the time I finish. I grab my mini fridge from my room and carry it out as quietly as possible, then lock the apartment behind me and practically run to my car. Back in the parking lot, I check the camera app and both feeds are working perfectly, showing clear footage of the empty kitchen and hallway. Tuesday morning, I'm sitting in Regina Ward's office at 9 a.m. sharp with my documentation notebook, medical records, police report number, and photos all organized in a folder. Regina is maybe 50 with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back, and she actually looks at me like I'm a person instead of an annoying problem. She reads through everything carefully, taking her time with each document and asking clarifying questions about the timeline. When she gets to the photos of the mice, her face gets hard and angry, and she asks why housing didn't escalate this immediately. I explain the resident assistant dismissed me and said Josh had already told her I was having episodes. Regina makes a note and says that's going to be addressed separately because it's a serious failure of duty. She explains the formal investigation process usually takes weeks, but she has authority to issue an emergency room separation if there's imminent risk to health or safety. I show her the progression photos of my weight loss, going from my normal size down to looking skeletal, and her expression gets even harder. She asks if I feel safe returning to the apartment, and I'm honest that I don't, that I've been sleeping in my car because I'm scared of what Josh might do next. Regina picks up her phone and starts making calls while I sit there trying not to hope too much. She talks to someone in housing assignments, then someone else in student conduct, her voice firm and professional. After about 40 minutes, she hangs up and tells me she's arranged for me to move into a temporary single room in Patterson Hall, effective immediately. The relief hits me so hard, I have to put my head between my knees to keep from passing out. Regina comes around her desk and puts a hand on my shoulder, telling me to breathe slowly and that I'm going to be okay now. She explains an RA will meet me at Patterson in an hour to give me keys and help me move my things. The room is mine for the rest of the semester minimum, and housing will cover any cost difference from my original arrangement. I meet the RA outside Patterson Hall at 11, a quiet guy named Marcus who doesn't ask invasive questions or make me explain anything. He just hands me keys, helps me carry my stuff up to the third floor, and shows me how everything works in the room. It's small with old furniture and a weird stain on the carpet, but it has a bed and a desk and a door that locks, and Josh doesn't have a key. That makes it feel like a palace compared to sleeping in my car. Marcus leaves and I spend an hour just sitting on the bed, processing that I actually have a safe space now. I set up my mini fridge in the corner and put all my food inside with the combination lock secured. Then I test the door lock about 15 times to make sure it's really working. That night, I sleep in an actual bed for the first time in a week, and even though I wake up multiple times to check the lock, it's the best rest I've gotten since this nightmare started. My body is so exhausted it overrides the anxiety just enough to let me crash hard for a few hours at a time. I dream about rotting mice and Josh's dead eyes, but at least I'm dreaming in a bed instead of curled up in my car. Wednesday morning, I wait until I know Josh has chemistry lab, then drive back to the old apartment to check the hidden cameras and grab anything else I need. The camera app shows 2 days of footage and I download it all to my laptop before reviewing. The first clip makes my blood run cold because it shows Josh entering my room Monday night, just standing in the doorway for almost 5 minutes looking around like he's planning something. He doesn't touch anything, just stares with this calculating expression that makes my skin crawl. The second clip is from Tuesday morning, Josh in my room again, this time opening my closet and checking my desk drawers like he's searching for something. I watch him pick up a photo of my family, stare at it for a long moment, then put it back exactly where it was. The kitchen footage shows him opening the fridge and cabinets multiple times, that same calculating look on his face. I save all the footage to my laptop in a backup drive, then reset the cameras to keep recording. I grab my mini fridge and a few more clothes, then get out of there before Josh's lab ends. Back at Patterson, I forward all the camera footage to Officer Hopkins with timestamps and descriptions. He responds within an hour saying this is excellent evidence of continued harassment and unauthorized entry, and it strengthens the case significantly. I spend another hour going through the rest of the kitchen footage frame by frame, watching Josh open the fridge and pull out items, examining them with this weird focus before putting them back. He checks the cabinets too, moving things around like he's looking for something specific, or maybe checking if I've touched anything. The way he moves is so careful and planned, nothing like the casual way normal people grab food from their own kitchen. I save every clip that shows this behavior to both drives, making sure I have backup copies of everything in case something happens to my laptop. Then I reset the cameras to keep recording and make a note to check them again tomorrow before Josh's morning classes. The documentation is building into something solid now, something that can't be explained away with his usual gaslighting tactics. Thursday morning, my phone buzzes with an email from Campus Health saying my lab results are ready for review. I head over right after my first class, stomach tight with nerves about what they might have found. Dr. Barrera pulls up the results on her computer and walks me through each section, pointing out the numbers that are off. My electrolytes are all over the place, she explains, which matches with the throwing up and not being able to keep food down. The dehydration markers are high too, and my liver enzymes are elevated in a pattern she says is consistent with toxic exposure over several weeks. She orders another round of tests, more specific ones that can identify particular toxins, and starts typing up a detailed letter documenting everything for my case file. The letter includes my weight loss progression, the physical symptoms I reported, the timeline of when things started, and her medical opinion that the lab findings support suspected poisoning. She prints 2 copies, one for me and one for the police, and reminds me to keep eating clean food and drinking plenty of water. Walking out of Campus Health, I feel this weird mix of validation and anger, because now I have actual proof that Josh was doing something to me, but it also means he really was poisoning me for weeks. I stop at the campus store on the way back to Patterson and load up on prepackaged snacks, protein bars, and sealed drinks that I can keep in my locked mini fridge. No more taking chances with any food that Josh could have touched or gotten near. That night, I eat a real meal for the first time in forever. Just simple stuff from sealed packages, and my stomach doesn't immediately rebel. By Friday morning, I notice the constant nausea that's been my baseline for weeks is starting to fade a little. Saturday, I actually feel hungry instead of just forcing myself to eat, and when I step on the scale at the campus gym, I've gained back 2 pounds. 3 days of clean food, and I can already feel my energy coming back. Like my body was just waiting for a chance to heal once I stopped putting poison into it. Sunday afternoon, my phone finally buzzes with a text from Francisco asking if we can meet somewhere off campus to talk. I stare at the message for a long time, not sure if I'm ready to deal with this yet, but I also need to know what Josh told him and whether our friendship is salvageable. I text back suggesting a coffee shop about 2 miles from campus, neutral territory where neither of us has home advantage. He agrees immediately, and we set it for Monday at 3. I spend the rest of Sunday going through my documentation and pulling together copies of the phone records and tech analysis that prove the threatening texts were faked. Part of me wants to trust that Francisco will believe me now, but another part remembers how easily he believed Josh's lies before. Monday, I get to the coffee shop 15 minutes early and grab a corner table where I can see the door. Francisco shows up right on time looking uncomfortable, his hands shoved in his pockets and his eyes darting around like he's not sure he should be here. He sits down across from me and orders a coffee but doesn't say anything at first, just stares at his cup and fidgets with the sleeve. I don't push him, just wait and sip my own drink, because I learned from dealing with Josh that sometimes staying calm and quiet is more powerful than filling the silence. After about 5 minutes, Francisco finally looks up and starts talking, his voice quiet and guilty. He explains that Josh showed him screenshots of texts that looked like they came from my number, threatening messages about making Josh pay and not letting him get away with things. The messages looked real, Francisco says, with my contact info and everything, and Josh seemed so genuinely worried and scared that Francisco believed him without question. Then Josh showed him photos of me looking sick and thin, claiming I was having some kind of breakdown and refusing help. I pull out my phone and open the records, sliding it across the table so Francisco can see the tech analysis. The report clearly shows those threatening texts were never sent from my actual number. They were spoofed using an app that lets you fake sender information. Francisco's face goes pale as he scrolls through the evidence, his hands starting to shake a little. I watch him realize that he completely abandoned me based on lies, that Josh played him perfectly and used him as another weapon against me. He starts apologizing over and over, saying he should have talked to me directly, should have questioned why I would suddenly start acting so different. I cut him off before he can spiral too much and explain that I need time before I can fully trust him again, that what happened really hurt, and I can't just pretend it didn't. But I also tell him I appreciate that he's willing to hear the truth now and that I understand how convincing Josh can be when he wants to manipulate someone. We spend the next hour comparing notes, Francisco telling me exactly what Josh said and showed him while I fill in the reality of what was actually happening. By the end, Francisco offers to write a formal statement about the manipulation tactics and fake evidence, something I can use to show the pattern of Josh's behavior. I accept the offer and we exchange a careful goodbye, not quite back to normal, but at least moving in the right direction. Thursday morning, I meet with Officer Hopkins again at the campus police station, bringing my laptop with all the camera footage queued up and ready to show. I also have the updated medical records from Dr. Barrera, including the lab results and her detailed letter, plus Francisco's written statement about how Josh fabricated evidence and manipulated him. Hopkins goes through everything methodically, taking notes and asking specific questions about timestamps and chain of custody. He tells me the case is definitely building and the pattern of harassment is clear, but criminal charges for poisoning are harder to prove beyond reasonable doubt because I need direct evidence that Josh intentionally contaminated my food. The circumstantial evidence is strong, Hopkins explains, but a prosecutor needs to prove intent and method, not just that I got sick while living with Josh. I feel disappointed but not surprised, because I knew proving poisoning would be tough without catching him in the act. Then I ask about the animal cruelty charges for the mice, and Hopkins's expression shifts to something more satisfied. Those charges are much more straightforward, he says, because I have photos of the dead mice stuffed in my electrical outlets and physical evidence that was documented. He's already coordinated with animal control, and they're treating it as a serious violation that could result in misdemeanor charges against Josh. Hopkins explains that animal cruelty laws cover killing or torturing animals, and deliberately stuffing dead mice in someone's living space definitely qualifies. That afternoon, I'm back in my room studying when my phone starts blowing up with texts from Josh. The first few messages are fake concern, asking if I'm okay and saying he's worried about me living alone. Then they shift to subtle threats about how I'm making things worse for myself by talking to police and spreading lies about him. One text says, I should think carefully about my future and whether I really want to go down this path. Another suggests that people who make false accusations often end up regretting it when the truth comes out. I screenshot every single message without responding, my hands steady now because I know exactly what to do with this evidence. I forward the entire conversation to Officer Hopkins with a note about the continued harassment, despite the no-contact order that housing put in place. Then I send the same screenshots to Regina Ward, so housing has documentation of Josh violating their directive. Within an hour, Hopkins texts back saying this is excellent evidence of harassment and shows Josh's threatening behavior and that he's adding it to the case file immediately. Friday morning, I get an email from Regina at 7 a.m. saying there's an emergency meeting at 9 and I need to be there. So I show up to her office 15 minutes early with my documentation folder. Josh arrives exactly on time, looking like he just stepped out of a catalog, hair perfect, and this concerned expression already arranged on his face. The housing conduct officer is a guy named Timothy, who's maybe 30 with glasses and a no-nonsense vibe, and he starts by explaining this is an emergency review based on new evidence of policy violations. Josh immediately jumps in with his worried roommate act, talking about how concerned he's been about my mental health and erratic behavior. I stay completely silent and let Timothy work through his notes, watching Josh perform this whole caring friend routine that would be convincing if I didn't know better. Timothy goes through each allegation methodically: the laptop destruction, the unauthorized room entry, the mice in the outlets, the pattern of harassment documented in texts. When Timothy mentions the camera footage showing Josh entering my room multiple times without permission, I see Josh's jaw muscles tighten, even though he keeps that concerned smile plastered on. His hands clench on the armrests for just a second before he controls it, and I realize his mask is starting to crack under the weight of actual evidence he can't explain away. Timothy pulls up the footage on his laptop, and we all watch Josh standing in my doorway, then opening my mini fridge, then checking my closet, and Josh's face goes from concerned to carefully blank. Regina is taking notes, and her expression has gone from professional neutral to coldly angry as she watches Josh violate my space on camera. Timothy explains that based on the documentation provided, including medical records, police reports, witness statements, and video evidence, housing is implementing an immediate no-contact order effective right now. He says the formal investigation will take 2 to 3 weeks, but the emergency separation is happening today because there's clear evidence of ongoing harassment and safety concerns. Josh's face finally shows real anger, not the fake concerned roommate, but actual rage that he's losing control of the situation. His voice stays level, but I can hear the edge in it when he argues that I'm the one who needs intervention, that he's been documenting my episodes for weeks. He pulls out his phone with this triumphant look and starts showing Timothy his carefully curated evidence, the photos of me looking sick, the timestamps of supposed erratic behavior, screenshots of messages to my family. Timothy looks at it for maybe 30 seconds, then sets the phone down and points out that none of Josh's documentation explains the dead mice stuffed in electrical outlets, the camera footage of unauthorized entry, or the medical records showing toxic exposure. Regina adds that Josh's documentation actually supports the harassment case because it shows he was monitoring and photographing me without consent, which is another policy violation. Josh's hands are shaking now, and he's gripping his phone so hard his knuckles are white, and I can see him trying to figure out how to regain control of the narrative. Timothy wraps up by explaining, Josh needs to stay away from me, my new residence hall, any shared spaces when I'm present, and all forms of contact are prohibited, including social media and third-party communication. Josh stands up without looking at me, but I can feel the rage coming off him in waves, this barely contained fury that makes my stomach clench with fear. He leaves the office, and I make a mental note to be extra careful about my safety because a cornered animal is dangerous, and Josh just lost all his power. Regina waits until the door closes, then tells me she's sorry it took this long to get here, that the system should have protected me sooner. I thank her and leave feeling both relieved and terrified because Josh knows he's losing, and I don't know what he'll do next. Over the weekend, I forced myself to focus on schoolwork instead of obsessing about Josh, spreading out my textbooks and laptop in my new room, and tackling the assignments I've missed. I email each of my professors with a brief explanation and copies of the medical documentation from Barrera, asking about makeup work and extensions. My English professor responds within an hour saying, "Take all the time I need and we'll figure out a plan when I'm ready." My chemistry professor offers to let me retake the midterm I missed and drops my lowest lab grade. My history professor extends all my deadlines by 2 weeks and sends resources for the campus tutoring center. By Sunday night, I've caught up on 3 weeks of reading and turned in 2 late assignments, and the structure of schoolwork actually helps me feel more normal. Monday morning, I have a follow-up appointment with Barrera, and she takes my weight first thing, then smiles and tells me I've gained back 3 pounds already. She checks my color and says I look so much better, asks about my energy levels and whether I'm keeping food down. I tell her everything is staying down now that I'm away from the contaminated kitchen, and she nods, like this confirms what she suspected all along. She refers me to campus counseling services and explains that psychological support is just as important as physical recovery, that trauma doesn't just heal on its own. I'm skeptical about therapy because I've never done it before, and it feels like admitting I'm broken, but Barrera says it's actually admitting I survived something traumatic and deserve support processing it. Tuesday afternoon, I show up at the counseling center for my first appointment with Sally, a therapist who specializes in trauma and interpersonal violence according to her bio. She's maybe 40 with kind eyes and an office full of plants, and she starts by explaining confidentiality and asking what brings me in. I give her the short version, the roommate harassment and poisoning and gaslighting, and she listens without interrupting or looking shocked. When I finish, she thanks me for trusting her with this and says what I experienced was serious psychological abuse, not just a roommate conflict. I feel this weird relief at hearing someone name it that way, like it validates that I'm not overreacting or being dramatic. Sally asks about my current symptoms, and I tell her about the trouble sleeping, the constant anxiety, checking locks multiple times, being scared of food, not trusting people. She nods and explains these are normal trauma responses, that my brain is trying to protect me from future harm by staying hypervigilant. She teaches me this grounding technique where I focus on 5 things I can see, 4 I can touch, 3 I can hear, 2 I can smell, 1 I can taste, to bring myself back to the present when anxiety spikes. We practice it together, and I'm surprised when it actually helps calm my racing thoughts. Sally says we'll work on processing the trauma at my pace and building back my sense of safety, and I leave feeling like maybe therapy won't be so bad after all. Wednesday morning, I get a call from Barrera's office saying my toxicology results are back, and I need to come in to discuss them. I show up expecting bad news but trying to stay calm, and Barrera pulls up the lab results on her computer. She explains the tests found traces of laxatives and other irritants in my system, consistent with chronic low-level poisoning over several weeks. My stomach drops because this confirms what I suspected, but it's different hearing it stated as medical fact. Barrera quickly adds that the levels aren't high enough to cause permanent organ damage, but they're definitely enough to cause the severe symptoms I experienced, including the weight loss, vomiting, and general physical deterioration. She prints out copies of the results for my records and says this documentation will be important for both the university conduct process and any criminal charges. I sent the toxicology results to Hopkins right after leaving Barrera's office, attaching the lab report and her documentation letter to the email. He called me back within an hour saying this made the case much stronger because it proved actual poisoning happened, not just my suspicions or paranoia. The problem was proving Josh did it instead of accidental exposure from somewhere else, since the toxicology couldn't show where the substances came from. Hopkins explained he was working with the prosecutor's office to figure out what criminal charges they could actually make stick with the evidence we had. He sounded more confident than before, but kept warning me that criminal cases needed proof beyond reasonable doubt, which was a really high bar to meet. I thanked him and said I understood, then asked about the timeline for any charges. He told me these things moved slowly through the system, and I shouldn't expect quick results, but he'd keep me updated on any progress. Thursday morning, I woke up to an email from Regina with the subject line, "Formal conduct hearing scheduled." My stomach dropped even though I'd been expecting this, knowing I'd have to face Josh again and relive everything in front of strangers. The email explained the hearing was set for the following Tuesday afternoon, and I needed to prepare my testimony and all supporting evidence. Regina attached a document outlining the procedures, explaining how the hearing would work and what I could expect. She made it clear I could bring one support person, but not a lawyer since this was an administrative university process, not a criminal trial. I read through the procedures 3 times, taking notes on what I needed to organize and how to present my case effectively. The weekend became all about preparation, turning my scattered evidence into a clear story the board could follow. I spread everything out on my floor and started building a timeline on poster board, marking each incident with dates and corresponding documentation. Francisco came over Saturday afternoon to help, bringing coffee and offering to be my support person at the hearing. We went through every piece of evidence together, organizing it chronologically and making sure nothing important was missing. I practiced walking through the timeline out loud while Francisco listened and asked questions, helping me figure out how to explain things clearly without getting emotional. The preparation made me feel more in control, instead of just reacting to whatever Josh threw at me next. By Sunday night, I had my testimony mostly memorized and all my evidence organized in labeled folders. Monday morning, I did a final check of everything before the hearing, going through my evidence piece by piece. Photos of the mice with timestamps showing when I found them stuffed in the outlets. Camera footage showing Josh entering my room without permission and spending time in the kitchen near my food. Medical records documenting my weight loss from 165 pounds down to 130. The vomiting blood, hair loss, and overall physical breakdown. The toxicology results showing laxatives and irritants in my system. The police report with case number and Hopkins's documentation. Screenshots of text messages including the ones Josh sent after the no-contact order. Francisco's written statement about how Josh manipulated him with spoofed texts and lies. My detailed notebook documenting every incident, symptom, and interaction with dates and times. I put everything in order following my timeline, making sure I could find any piece of evidence quickly if the board asked questions. Tuesday afternoon, I showed up at the administration building 30 minutes early, too nervous to risk being late. Regina met me in the lobby and walked me to the conference room where the hearing would happen. The room had a long table with 3 chairs on one side for the board members and chairs facing them for me and Josh. Timothy was already there setting up, along with 2 other board members I didn't recognize. Then Josh walked in with his parents and a man in an expensive suit who had to be their lawyer. My chest got tight seeing him look so put together and confident, flanked by his crying mother and serious father. Regina leaned over and quietly told me the lawyer couldn't actually participate in the university process. He was just there for moral support and advice. That helped a little, but I still felt outmatched and alone even with Francisco sitting next to me. Timothy called the hearing to order and explained the process, then asked me to present my evidence first. I stood up on shaky legs and walked to the front, plugging my laptop into their projector. I started with the laptop destruction incident, showing the timeline and explaining how it set the pattern for everything that followed. Then the smell in my room and discovering the rotting mice in the outlets, showing the photos that made one board member actually gasp. I walked them through the food poisoning systematically, showing my weight loss progression in photos and medical records. The camera footage played on the screen showing Josh in my room and kitchen, and I explained how I'd set up the cameras after moving out. I showed the toxicology results and Barrera's letter documenting the medical findings. My voice stayed steady, even when describing the worst parts because I'd practiced this so many times. I finished by showing the text messages and explaining how Josh had isolated me by manipulating everyone around me. The whole presentation took about 40 minutes, and when I sat down, my hands were shaking, but I felt good about how I'd laid everything out. Josh's testimony came next, and I watched him transform into the concerned roommate character he'd perfected. He talked about how worried he'd been watching me spiral into what he thought was mental illness, how he'd tried to help, but I kept pushing him away. His voice had this perfect mix of sadness and frustration that would have been convincing if I didn't know the truth. His parents started crying when he talked about his difficult childhood with their divorce and how he'd learned to be compassionate toward people struggling with their mental health. The lawyer kept trying to interject with legal objections until Timothy firmly told him this wasn't a courtroom and he needed to stay quiet. Josh claimed he had no idea how the mice got in my outlets and suggested maybe I'd put them there myself during one of my episodes. He said the camera footage just showed him checking on me out of concern when I wasn't answering his texts. The board members listened with neutral faces, and I couldn't tell if they were buying his act or seeing through it. Timothy asked Josh to explain why he was in my room without permission and why he'd sent texts after the no-contact order was issued. Josh fumbled a bit, saying he was just worried about my safety, and the no-contact order seemed like an overreaction. One of the other board members asked about the laptop incident, and Josh claimed it was an accident, that I'd left it near the sink and he'd knocked it in while doing dishes. His explanations didn't quite make sense when you put them all together, but he delivered them with such confidence. Francisco testified next, explaining how Josh had manipulated him with fake texts and lies about my supposed anger issues. He showed screenshots of messages from Josh that contradicted the whole concerned roommate story, proving Josh had deliberately worked to isolate me. The lawyer started to object, but Timothy shut him down immediately, reminding everyone that all relevant testimony would be heard regardless of legal technicalities. Francisco's voice was steady and apologetic, acknowledging he'd failed me by believing Josh's lies. After all the testimony, the board said they needed to deliberate and asked us to wait outside. Regina led me to her office while Josh and his family went somewhere else. I sat in her guest chair staring at the wall, too anxious to read or look at my phone or do anything productive. 2 hours crawled by with my brain running through everything that had been said, trying to figure out if I'd done enough. Regina tried to make small talk but eventually gave up and let me sit in silence. Finally, her phone rang and she told me the board was ready. We walked back to the conference room where Josh and his family were already seated. Timothy's face looked serious, and I couldn't read whether that was good or bad for me. Timothy cleared his throat and opened the folder in front of him, and my stomach twisted into knots waiting for the words that would determine everything. He read through the findings in this formal voice that made each word feel heavy. And final, explaining that based on the evidence presented, the board found Josh responsible for harassment, unauthorized entry into my room, creating an unsafe living environment, and violating the no-contact order through his texts. Josh sat completely still across the table, his face blank like he was watching something happen to someone else instead of him. Timothy continued reading that Josh was removed from campus housing for a minimum of 1 year, placed on academic probation, and required to complete counseling before the university would even consider any readmission to housing. The relief hit me so hard, I had to grip the edge of my chair to keep from shaking, and I watched Josh's mask finally crack just a little around the edges as the reality sank in. Josh's mom started crying immediately, reaching across to grab his arm while his dad stood up so fast his chair scraped loud against the floor. His dad started arguing that this decision would destroy Josh's future, that it was too harsh for what amounted to roommate conflicts, and his mom kept saying they didn't understand how hard things had been for Josh growing up. The lawyer jumped in, threatening to sue the university for discrimination and improper procedures, his voice getting louder as he listed off legal terms I didn't understand. Timothy just sat there calm and patient, waiting for them to run out of steam before he spoke again. He explained in this steady voice that the decision was based on clear documented evidence, that Josh had full appeal rights through proper channels, and that this meeting was now over. He asked them to leave the conference room, and when the lawyer tried to argue more, Timothy stood up and walked to the door, holding it open until they had no choice but to file out. Josh looked back at me once as he left, his face completely blank again, and I couldn't tell if he was planning something or just empty inside. After they were gone, Regina came over and sat in the chair next to me, speaking quietly so only I could hear. She told me that housing had agreed to cover the cost difference for my single room for the rest of the academic year, and she would help me get a permanent assignment for next semester if I wanted to stay in the same building. The relief should have felt bigger, but instead I just felt strangely empty, like I'd used up every emotion I had just getting through the hearing, and now there was nothing left. I thanked her and she squeezed my shoulder before gathering up her papers, and I sat there alone in the conference room for a few minutes, just staring at the table. Timothy came back in to check on me and asked if I needed anything, and I shook my head because I couldn't think of a single thing that would help right now. That night, I sat in my new room staring at my phone for almost an hour before I finally worked up the courage to call my parents. I'd been avoiding them for weeks, giving short answers about being busy with classes, and now I had to explain why. My mom answered on the second ring, sounding worried because I never called this late, and as soon as I heard her voice, everything just broke open. I told them everything about Josh and the laptop and the mice and the poisoning and almost dying, the words tumbling out between sobs I couldn't control. My mom started crying too, and my dad got on the other line, both of them asking why I hadn't told them sooner, offering to drive up right now tonight to be with me. I told them I was okay now, that it was over and handled, and I just needed to hear their voices and know they didn't hate me for keeping secrets. They stayed on the phone with me for 2 hours, my dad asking practical questions about my health, and my mom just listening and telling me how proud she was that I'd survived this. By the time we hung up, I felt wrung out but lighter somehow, like sharing the weight had made it easier to carry. Wednesday morning, I was in the library trying to focus on a paper when Officer Hopkins called. He explained that the prosecutor had reviewed all the evidence and decided to file misdemeanor charges against Josh for animal cruelty and harassment based on the mice evidence and the documented pattern of behavior. I asked about the poisoning charges, and Hopkins said those were harder to prove beyond reasonable doubt in criminal court, so they weren't pursuing those. The disappointment must have shown in my voice because he quickly added that the toxicology results would still be part of the harassment case evidence. I told Hopkins I understood, but it felt wrong that Josh might get away with literally poisoning me, and Hopkins explained that the university sanctions combined with misdemeanor charges would create a permanent record that would follow Josh everywhere. He also mentioned that Josh had violated the no-contact order multiple times after it was issued by sending those texts, which made the harassment case even stronger. Hopkins said the court date would be set within the next few months and I'd need to testify, but he felt confident about the outcome. I thanked him and hung up, trying to focus on the fact that Josh was facing real consequences, even if they weren't everything I wanted. Over the next 2 weeks, I threw myself into getting my life back to something normal, attending every class and turning in assignments I'd missed. My English professor let me rewrite a paper I'd bombed during the worst of the poisoning, and my chemistry professor gave me extra credit work to make up for labs I'd missed. I spent hours in the library catching up on reading, my body finally strong enough to focus for more than 20 minutes at a time. The routine felt good, gave me something concrete to work toward instead of just surviving each day. By the end of the second week, I'd pulled my grades up from failing to passing in 3 classes, and my professors kept telling me how impressed they were with my work ethic. Francisco and I started meeting for lunch twice a week at the student union, sitting at the same corner table each time. The conversations were awkward at first, both of us dancing around what had happened, but slowly we found our rhythm again. He never made excuses for believing Josh's lies, but he showed up consistently, texted to check in, and respected when I needed space. I set clear boundaries about communication, telling him I needed him to verify things with me directly instead of believing what other people said. He agreed immediately and started doing exactly that, asking me directly about plans or concerns instead of making assumptions. It wasn't the easy friendship we'd had before, but it felt more solid somehow, built on honesty instead of just habit. My weekly therapy sessions with Sally became this anchor point where I could process everything without judgment. She helped me work through the anger at Josh without letting it take over my whole life, pointing out that staying angry would just give him more power over me. Sally explained that I'd survived something genuinely bad and come out the other side by being smart and careful rather than giving in to revenge fantasies. We worked on strategies for managing the anxiety that still spiked sometimes, and she validated that healing wasn't linear, that some days would be harder than others. She also helped me see that I was stronger than I'd thought, that the way I'd documented everything and built my case showed real strength and intelligence. 3 weeks after the hearing, I was walking across campus when I saw the RA, who'd initially dismissed my concerns about the mice. She stopped when she saw me, looking uncomfortable, and I almost kept walking, but something made me pause. She apologized for not taking me seriously sooner, her voice quiet and sincere, explaining that she'd been trained to look for certain red flags, but Josh had been so convincing. She told me that housing had implemented new mandatory training on recognizing gaslighting and manipulation tactics, so future students in my situation would be believed faster. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, and she touched my arm briefly before walking away. The apology didn't fix what had happened, but it felt like some kind of acknowledgement that the system had failed me, and maybe that failure would help someone else down the line. The next few weeks, I kept going to campus health for checkups and watching the scale numbers climb back up in a way that felt almost unreal after losing so much. Barrera ran blood tests every week at first, then every 2 weeks, checking my liver numbers and making sure everything was healing right. By the end of the first month, I'd gained back 15 pounds and could walk across campus without getting tired halfway through. My hair stopped falling out, and the constant sick feeling in my stomach finally went away completely. Barrera showed me the lab results at my last appointment, pointing to the numbers that proved my liver was working normally again, and all the weird chemicals were out of my system. She signed off on my medical clearance and told me I didn't need to come back unless something changed, which felt like graduating from being sick back to being a regular person. Around the same time, Hopkins called while I was walking to class and told me Josh had taken a plea deal on the harassment and animal cruelty charges. I stopped right there on the sidewalk while Hopkins explained that Josh got probation for a year, had to do community service, and couldn't come on campus except for classes with advance notice to campus security. Hopkins said the prosecutor wanted to avoid a trial, and Josh's lawyer pushed for the deal, so it got resolved faster than expected. I didn't feel much of anything when I heard it, just this weird flatness like my brain had already moved on and didn't care what happened to Josh anymore. The important part was that it was done, and I didn't have to think about court dates or testimony or seeing him again. 2 months after everything ended, I was sitting in my usual spot in the campus library, the corner table on the 3rd floor where nobody bothered me, studying for my biology final. I had my notes spread out and my laptop open and a coffee getting cold next to my textbook, just completely normal student stuff. Francisco texted asking if I wanted to grab lunch at the student union after I finished studying, and I said yes without even thinking about it, because we'd been doing that twice a week, and it felt natural again. I looked around at the other students studying, and the afternoon sun coming through the windows, and realized I felt safe for the first time since moving in with Josh. My single room in the new dorm felt like home now, with my posters up and my stuff organized how I wanted it. My grades were good. I'd made it through the semester, and the constant watching over my shoulder had faded to just normal caution. The whole nightmare taught me I was tougher than I thought, and that keeping records and being patient worked better than revenge ever could have. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again, and sitting there in the library with my coffee and my textbooks and plans to meet Francisco for lunch, that felt like enough. Well, that was a lot. From fake funerals to actual poisoning to a college hearing, this story had everything. Look, if you stuck around for this whole journey, I appreciate you. Hit subscribe if you want more stories that start dark, but end with at least some hope. And yeah, maybe check your outlet covers if your room smells weird. I'm just saying, talk to you later.